Yeah, I think that's thrown up a bit of an ethical quandary for me because I'm somebody who staunchly believes that bad ideas, when adopted, will certainly lead to bad consequences, certainly bad behavior, depending on the idea. And I suppose that was something that was highlighted, and you highlighted this too with the case of Leslie Lawrenson. This is a man from the UK. Seemed like a fairly bright individual, well educated. He was a big believer that COVID wasn't very serious. He'd refused the vaccine and he died at home from COVID. And it was later discovered that he was a big proponent of Bret Weinstein's. He'd shared many of Bret Weinstein's Dark Horse podcasts via his social media on the issue of ivermectin and the vaccine, and provided his own commentary. And it seemed that he was very much influenced by Bret's output on this topic. So there's this issue here for me between bad ideas informing bad behavior, which clearly happens, versus the concept of personal agency. And you took a very direct position on this, and you outright held Bret personally responsible for this man's death. Now, I certainly think there's definitely something to this, but it also made me feel very uncomfortable at the same time. And I'm not sure how I feel about holding him personally responsible, albeit I think that his output is certainly culpable in leading to these deaths. So do you still feel the same way about that comment? Was that comment that you made in the the heat of a bit of passion on the news of this man's tragic and unnecessary death, or is this something you staunchly stand by?
It was definitely made in the heat of passion, and it's definitely something I stand by. I think Bret's anti-vax messaging contributed to Leslie Lawrenson's death. And not just his death. I think there's many countless other deaths that we haven't heard about that have been contributed to anti-vax messaging propagated and amplified by Bret and Heather. So it's as simple as that. I mean, they're not 100% culpable, probably not even, well, I don't know, in the legal sense, you could make a case that, wrongful death, that the messaging that they promoted, and to people who were their fans before, that they could have contributed in some part to people not getting vaccinated, that could have led. I mean, legal issues I don't even want to get into, but like ethical issues, I definitely think this is something that will weigh on their conscience forever. So that's something that they'll have to live with, and hopefully, eventually, they'll atone for it. But if not, I don't know. So
I mean, this is very difficult in the sense that we have this amazing socially interconnected group of supercomputers now. We all have the whole world in our pocket. We can all find our own little echo chambers of reinforcement. I can go and find content that all it does is bolster my pre-existing biases about the world in general, and that's all fun and games until we have a public health crisis, I suppose. And
exactly.
It's been especially dangerous during this pandemic, and the big tech giants are doing what they can to sort of take down content they find to be false and misleading, and there is some overreach from them as they're trying to figure it out. Where do you fall on the area of freedom of expression in terms of people like Bret being able to propagate misinformation about vaccines and ivermectin to the detriment of real human beings, versus a case for censorship for that kind of thing?
As much as I disagree and hate the messaging of Bret and Heather or anybody or any other anti-vaxxer, I can't support censorship just by virtue of having grown up in a heavily totalitarian censored country. I know that, censorship is a very slippery slope and just something that cannot ever stand. And whether it's censorship by big tech or, government, I'm against censorship. I think, good ideas will ultimately prevail over bad ones, and we have to. But if you actually start censoring bad ones, you get into the Streisand effect that they're actually amplified. This is what happened with Bret's podcast once it was removed from YouTube. Like people say, "Oh, this must mean that's true." So I'm against censorship, but that doesn't mean that I'm against responsibility or legal ramifications of misinformation. Like, you're free to say whatever the hell you want, but just be aware that if it causes people to die, that can come back and, lead to, again, legal issues with whatever you said. If that was obviously misinformation, I mean, it's a question whether it's known misinformation, like if you believe it to be true. There's all different like shades of what legal culpability is, and then probably this is not the place to get into it, but just something that you have to be aware of. And this is the problem when people are very certain of their positions, and when they propagate them in the context of I'm saving the world, or this is an emergency podcast because big pharma or big tech are censoring this miracle drug. That's definitely much more dangerous than you just is academic seminar, as Bret is then kind of backpedaling, like, I'm not responsible for you modifying your behavior. If you were convinced by me, I'm still not, culpable if you something that I convinced you about then killed you. This was just like academic seminar. So there's kind of this disconnect, and I think just kind of sort of backpedaling going on once kind of he realized that maybe his messaging is not as accurate about this. Vaccines are dangerous, or ivermectin is a magic bullet stuff.